I just want to live with my family. The useless ATM needs to leave. I took those words in stride. Finally. It was worth the 18 years of patience. At that moment, two men in suits entered from behind me. What? My name is Silk. I'm 74 years old and will soon be celebrating 75th birthday. It's just me, my son Ken, his wife Helen, and their son Oliver, a household of 4 across 2 generations. We might seem like a lively 2-generation family to others. But since I lost my husband, I've often felt lonely and tend to become downhearted. Ken is a gentle soul, averse to conflict. In contrast, his wife Helen has a strong personality and is quick to complain if something doesn't suit her. Oliver seems to be working hard at his new job, hardly ever home, whether it's the weekend or a weekday. Helen can be particularly harsh with me, lobbing cruel words my way. As someone who's not very brave, her words sting like little thorns, making me shrink inside. I've never once spoken harshly to Helen, on the contrary, I'm usually the one who has to listen to her complaints. As a result, I often find myself doing Helen's bidding, and sometimes I feel like I'm her housekeeper. Helen is tight-fisted with money, yet she likes to show off, often going out to lunch in the downtown area with friends. When she goes out, she asks me to do the cleaning and to take in the laundry. Moreover, when she heads downtown, she has me drive her to the station. Helen climbs into the back seat as if it were the most natural thing, making me feel like a taxi driver. And she's under the mistaken belief that living together in a 2-generation household is her way of showing filial piety to me. Helen often says, "I'm doing you a favor by living here." Since my husband passed away, I've wanted to live quietly by myself. However, I've never been able to express this wish to Helen or Ken. Come on, get up now. It seems she's waking up Ken, who had worked late into the night. From the couple's bedroom, Helen's shrill voice echoes. It's the same old story, but today Helen is in a bad mood again. Despite it being a weekend, she wakes Ken up at the same time as usual and hurries him to get ready. I speak to Ken as he washes his face in the bathroom. Are you feeling all right? Ken had dark circles under his eyes. I'm fine. I got about 5 hours of sleep, Ken said, smiling gently as he dried his face with a towel. Lately, Ken has particularly looked pale. Ken's father kept working despite the family's concerns, always saying, I'm fine, I'm fine. But one day, he suddenly collapsed and that was the end of him. I know all too well that saying I'm fine is a danger signal. I'm fine is often anything but fine. Watching Ken wash his face, the memories of that time come flooding back, and I feel a tightness in my chest. I wish I could let him rest on his day off, but I can't bring myself to say that to Helen. Loud footsteps come from upstairs. It's the sound of someone in a bad mood. No doubt, it's Helen. As I frowned, Helen showed up at the bathroom door. Helen had a scowl, with a furrow between her eyebrows. She doesn't even try to hide her displeasure. Hurry up, or I'll be late for my appointment with my friends. Ken lowers his gaze as he puts the towel back. Sorry. I'll get changed right away. My meek son quickly leaves the room. Helen thrusts a piece of paper at me. Mother-in-law, here's a shopping list. Please take care of it. Helen doesn't even look me in the eye as she hands me the paper. Sure, I got it. Have fun with your friends. I manage a smile as full of grace as I can muster. Helen hands me only the list, no money. The payment will come out of my pension. It looks like the weather will be nice today, so please air out the beddings too. Helen adds another request as she leaves, not waiting for my reply. Helen walked away without waiting for my response. I let out a heavy sigh as I watched her insolent departure. On her way out, Helen called out loudly from the front door. Make sure you heat up the bath for when I get back. With a sharp click, the door closed behind her as she left. From the start of our living together, Helen never held back with us. During our initial cohabitation greetings, I told Helen not to be shy. It seems that was completely unnecessary. As we spent more time together, Helen's aggressive nature became more apparent. Her true colors showed. She's not good at household chores, especially cooking. I ended up preparing every meal. I even made Oliver's lunches. Moreover, Helen is picky with her food. If she doesn't like what's served, she'll stand up and say, I told you I can't eat this, and leave. She often complains about other chores as well. Stains not washed out of the laundry. Streaks left on the window glass. No spare toilet paper. Her favorite juice not in stock, and so on, scattering her complaints at me all day. I remind myself that she's the woman Ken chose. I've always tried to stay calm and pleasant, constantly smiling to avoid making waves. But lately, Helen's behavior has become even more blatant, truly wearing me out. Helen goes out with friends almost every week. Since the beginning of her marriage, she hardly did any housework or childcare. She spent and cared a lot for her appearance. Helen has a cheerful and glamorous air about her when she's outside. She seems to be popular with men, often receiving calls from men I don't know. I've suspected Helen of infidelity. However, Ken seems to blindly trust Helen. Even when I warn him, all he can reply with is a week I'll handle it. Not long after Helen and Ken left, Ken came back. Ken had been drafted to take Helen to the station. Ken returned, carrying several shopping bags. As I looked at him in surprise, he let out a sigh. The sweets Helen's going to give out at her class reunion next week. But this is so much. Apparently, there's even more in the car. She plans to distribute them to everyone at the reunion. They're an assortment from a famous Western-style pastry shop. It must have cost a pretty penny. Ken murmured as if he had caught on. Helen has her own pride. She doesn't want to be seen as struggling for money while living with her parents. Sorry, can you just let her have her way? After bringing in the bags, Ken slumped onto the sofa. I decided to go out for the shopping Helen had asked for. I can drive, so I'd like to use the car. But Helen complained to me, nagging about the waste of money on gas. So, I usually just walk, no matter the errand. The walk back always feels so long with heavy bags in tow. I often have to rest multiple times before I make it home. During one of these walks, I heard my grandson Oliver's voice. "Grandma, let me help with the bags." Turning around, there was Oliver, taking the shopping bags from my hands. He had a stern look on his face. "Why aren't you using the car? Did Mom complain about the gas money?" I didn't answer, I just smiled back at him. Ever since Oliver started his job last spring, we've seen less and less of each other at home. He comes home late and leaves early in the morning. It seems he's often working on weekends too and hardly ever at home. It's rare for Oliver to be at home like today. Oliver quickly began putting away the groceries in the kitchen. His movements were full of energy and joy. While I was helping to tidy up the kitchen, Oliver started to talk to me, a shy smile on his face. "Actually, there's someone I want to introduce you to." It made me reflect on how grown-up he'd become. It felt like just moments ago he was taking his first steps, and now he has someone special to introduce. I'm thinking of bringing her over next week. As he stored vegetables in the fridge, Oliver talked with a bashful tone. "Grandma, there's something I've been thinking about for a long time. I wonder what's on Oliver's mind." As I tried to probe further, Oliver continued talking excitedly. "I can't talk about it right now, but I'll be bringing this person home." I couldn't help but smile at his news. I was curious about what Oliver couldn't talk about. But for now, I was more intrigued by what kind of woman Oliver would bring home. Oliver's eagerness to go out on his rare days off was probably for dates. Thinking about it that way, it feels quite heartwarming. This would be the first time Oliver brought a woman home. Today, I felt so uplifted that even Helen's usual nagging didn't bother me as I went about my chores. That evening, Oliver talked to Helen and Ken about the woman he wanted to introduce. Ken was pleased, but Helen grimaced unpleasantly without a hint of a smile. I stole glances at Helen's expression, worrying that it wouldn't be easy. It happened on his next day off. As I was cleaning the entranceway, Oliver appeared. Standing next to him was a fair-skinned, demure-looking young woman. "Grandma, this is Luna," Oliver said, with a happy look on his face. "Nice to meet you." "I'm Luna," she said, smiling gracefully. It was a very beautiful smile. She seemed very polite as well. Her parents must have raised her well. I took the two of them into the living room. Contrary to my expectations, Helen was in a good mood, asking the couple about how they met. I was in the kitchen preparing tea, but hearing Helen's laughter gave me a sense of relief. I didn't even mind when Helen urged me to hurry with the tea. But as I was about to bring in the tea, I heard Helen's scornful voice. And I saw Luna's pale face. What could have happened? "Don't be ridiculous," What do you mean, a shotgun wedding? So it was true, Luna was pregnant with Oliver's child. And they intended to marry. Helen was objecting to this. I was indeed surprised. Just a short while ago, the atmosphere had been so cordial, but now it was tense. Oliver looked down, biting his lip. With a strained voice, he spoke, bowing his head. We're serious about this. We might be young, but please give us your blessing to get married. Following his lead, Luna also lowered her head. Please. They were both earnestly seeking approval for their marriage. Seeing their sincere attitude, I wanted to support them. I knew if I said anything, Helen would surely object. Yet, I wanted to stand by them. I was struggling to hold back tears. Ken spoke up. Of course, we support you two getting married. It's better to marry sooner for the baby's sake and have everything in order. Oliver's face lit up. Thanks, Dad. Oliver and Luna exchanged a smile. Helen had an overtly displeased look on her face. A shotgun wedding is so tacky. Explain properly. As Luna glanced down at the table, fumbling for words, Oliver gently placed a hand on her shoulder. We were serious about our relationship and planning to marry anyway. The baby just gave us a good reason to move forward. Just because there's a baby doesn't mean you have to get married, you know. Isn't that right, mother-in-law? Helen turned a sarcastic smile my way. But, if it's what the two of them have decided, I think all we can do is support them. Helen stood up silently and left the room. An uncomfortable silence filled the living room. Ken stood up, patting Oliver's shoulder. Mom will understand. I'll talk to her too. Oliver gave a small nod. I was clueless about what Helen was thinking, and anxiety spread through me. The next day, Ken dropped a bombshell. Helen told Ken that it's time for mother-in-law to leave the house, and from now on, it will just be the two couples living together, them and Oliver and his wife. Helen had told Ken to keep it a secret from me, but he let me know. I was at a loss, silent with my head in my hands. What shocked me even more was the fact that Helen was managing my husband's estate, including our house. My husband had left his entire estate to Ken. And Ken, in turn, was under Helen's thumb. This meant that Helen had control over all our family assets. I was left stunned, having been robbed of everything by Helen. I had no assets or property of my own. Helen had even started to harass me. She would wait for me to get into the bath before draining the hot water and turning off the water heater. I was left with no choice but to shower in cold water. There were times when I found the washing machine unplugged and had to wash clothes by hand. Clearly, she was trying to drive me out. The harassment escalated over time. For my own safety, I knew I had to confront Helen. Luckily, I had a few aces up my sleeve. I decided to prepare, consulting with Ken as I went. But dealing with Helen, that's another story. I wonder if it'll really work out. The weeks flew by since I decided to confront her. When things had started to calm down, Helen called Oliver and Luna. Sitting at the living room table with uneasy expressions were Oliver and Luna. Helen sat across from them, looking at Oliver and Luna with a calm expression on her face. Once everyone had gathered, I suspected Helen would deliver my death sentence. After gulping down her tea and crossing her arms with a sigh. Well, it's pointless to oppose it anyway. So, when do you plan to get married? Everyone was stunned by Helen's change of heart. Oh, we want to do it sooner rather than later, considering Luna's condition. Helen had an eerily calm expression. Is that right? So, this means we're finally getting a break from parenting, huh? Helen turned around in the kitchen to face me and yelled out loud. We're gonna live just with family. The useless ATM needs to leave. I took her words in stride. Finally, it was worth enduring these 18 years. Just then, two men in suits came in from behind me. What? The story takes us back 2 weeks. I was invited to the apartment where Luna was living alone. Oliver was also there. They were probably living together, almost like a couple. In the bathroom, there were matching toothbrushes lined up, which was quite sweet. Luna's belly was slightly showing, and she was gently stroking it. Oliver had me sit at the dining table and, with a serious expression, he began. There's something important I need to tell you. It's a conversation you don't want Helen to overhear, right? Oliver silently nodded with a shy smile. He had a bit of a shy smile. Luna was also smiling faintly, looking happy. As Oliver offered me a cup of coffee he made, he continued. How about moving in with us? I heard from Dad. Mom's trying to kick Grandma out. I was taken aback by the sudden proposal. I almost dropped the mug I was holding. Oliver was looking at me seriously. That's true, but I can't depend on you. Oliver's expression remained serious. Luna was holding Oliver's hand as if to envelop it. It was clear that Oliver was serious about wanting me to move in with them. I straightened up without realizing it. I've always thought about it since I was a kid. Grandma was always treated badly by Mom, and I couldn't stand it. Sure, your mom is strong-willed and assertive. Dad doesn't talk back either. I can't just watch Grandma being treated so poorly by Mom in silence. I'm okay, really. Thank you for worrying. Hey, Grandma, do you remember when I first said I wanted to introduce you to Luna? It was indeed the time Oliver mentioned he wanted to introduce Luna. His determined way of speaking had struck me, but I had forgotten it until now. It's something I've thought about for a long time. I've always wanted to be there to help Grandma once I became an adult. So, Oliver had been thinking about that all this time. I felt tears threatening to spill over. I always thought Mom was so cold and rude to Grandma. To kick you out now, that's just too much. Oliver really cared that much about me. He leaned forward, looking into my eyes intently. Let's live together with us. There's no need for you to suffer alone in that house. As I was lost for words, Luna also looked at me with a serious expression. Oliver told me all about you, Grandma. Please, come live with us. I'm touched, truly. But I don't want to be in the way of your life. That won't be the case. We need your experience with raising kids, and it would mean so much to have you live with us. Oliver and Luna both seemed sincere and pleaded, please, we're begging you, come live with us. I couldn't stop the tears from flowing, touched by their earnestness and kindness. Thank you. I understand how you feel. I will live with you. No, please let me live with you. I held their hands with sincere gratitude. And so, it was decided that I would live with Oliver and Luna. I reminded myself that the final battle with Helen awaited me. Then, I left their apartment. With this arrangement, even if Helen kicked me out, I would have a place to go. But that wasn't my only weapon. Standing behind Helen now were two allies, a dignified, older gentleman and a tall, young man. Remember when I said just now that it was worth enduring these 18 years? Helen looked deflated as if the venom had been drained from her. This gentleman here is the landowner of this property, an old childhood friend of my late husband. I introduced as the older man gave a slight nod. This land is actually leased. I explained that the condition for leasing this land was that I would live here. Everyone looked puzzled. I recounted how the landowner and my husband had once quarreled over who would marry me. In the end, I chose my husband. The landowner agreed to lease this land on the condition that my husband and I would continue to live here. I explained everything in order. I've been living here ever since. Wow, Grandma, you were quite popular back in the day. The landowner was blushing. Helen was speechless, quivering her lips. So, we all have to leave this place? That's right. Helen, I've put up with you for 18 years since we started living together. But that's over now. How can this be fair? What about the rights of the person leasing? You can't just tell someone to leave. Helen retorted, getting agitated. Normally, that's true. But I consulted and decided to leave, and I terminated the lease agreement myself. Helen's face turned red as she bit her lip. I've lived in this house for many years, but it's time to end this chapter. I'm going to live with Oliver and Luna now. Don't joke with me. I won't allow such selfishness. Helen suddenly exploded with emotion. Who's joking? You openly showed disgust at Luna's pregnancy. Your harassment of me, your attitude toward Ken, all of it has been terrible. Helen slammed her hands on the table. Helen, I want a divorce. Ken spoke to Helen with a serious look on his face. Helen, her momentum cut, was left with her mouth half open. I'm fed up with living with you. I want to separate. What is this all about? You're making a problem out of Grandma living with Oliver and Luna now that this house is gone, aren't you? Mom is going to live with Oliver and Luna. That's the end of that discussion. This is about you and me now. I don't want to live with you anymore. Helen was visibly frightened by Ken's sudden change from his usual obedient demeanor.
Why such a sudden change?
I've always tolerated your attitude because Mom did. But if she's moving out to live with Oliver and Luna, there's no need for me to tolerate it anymore. I want to divorce you. The tall man standing behind presented an envelope on the table. This man is from a detective agency. He's been investigating you for years. Ken opened the envelope and spread its contents out on the table. Helen's face turned pale as she saw what was laid out before her. The contents were photographs and documents. The photos showed Helen arm in arm with an unfamiliar young man, entering a hotel. There were also pictures of Helen coming out of a nightclub. These are proof of your infidelity. I've had you under surveillance for quite some time. A lie? No, this is all a misunderstanding. Whether it's a misunderstanding or not, the evidence is here. It's clear you've been spending the household money for some young man. Ken continued as he handed Helen a copy of the transaction details. I was shocked by Ken's thoroughness. Just how far had he investigated? Perhaps the most frightening adversary was Ken himself. With his gentle face unchanged, he pressed on insistently, which made it all the more intimidating. Helen, either giving up or defiant, leaned back and began to smirk. Because, you see, he's going to be a singer in the future. I was funding for it. So what's wrong with supporting that? Ken shook his head and sighed. So, what about these pictures? Ken asked as he showed photos of Helen and the man she had been arm in arm with entering an apartment with another woman. Helen's eyes widened as she intently stared at the photograph. Helen's hands could be seen trembling slightly. That guy has been using the money you gave him to go out and have fun. He then pulled an audio recorder from the envelope. Here, there's a recording of him saying you're just an ATM to him. Helen seemed unable to comprehend, clutching her head and squeezing her eyes shut. And she kept muttering lies, 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 lies under her breath. Helen, you were being deceived too. That doesn't excuse anything, though. Helen looked around, eyes wide, desperate.
What am I supposed to do now? How am I supposed to live?
That's for you to figure out. You'll have plenty of time to make amends for your sins. I'm done with this life, Ken declared, raising his voice more than usual, which made Helen tear up and cower. Ken stood up from his chair and glared down at Helen. I can't do this anymore. It's not just your attitude towards me, but everything you've done to Mom, it's unforgivable. Ken, usually so calm, had been harboring this resentment for years. He might be quiet, but he's tenacious and hardworking. And he's a hard worker. It seemed likely that he had been planning his retribution against Helen for a long time. Helen had been under investigation for nearly a decade. Now, she was thoroughly defeated. Helen was speechless, sliding off the chair and collapsing onto the floor. Without another word, Ken left the house, followed by the landowner and the detective agency guy.
No! Ken, come back! I'm sorry.
Helen continued to cry uncontrollably. I, along with Oliver and Luna, left the house. Helen, left alone, was wrapped in deep regret and despair over her irreversible actions. Afterward, Helen and Ken's divorce was finalized. Helen had fiercely opposed it, bringing the matter to mediation. However, with the plethora of evidence against her, she ended up having to pay a substantial amount in alimony. Helen demanded her share of the property division, but was cornered about the money she had squandered on the young man. To avoid compensating for the money she took, Helen reluctantly gave up her claim to the property. She brought it onto herself. Helen was left without a place to live, and as for money, she had to pay back all the money she took. She ended up saddled with a substantial amount of debt. She lives in a dilapidated apartment in a rundown suburb. She works tirelessly, day shifts at a factory and night shifts as a security guard for road construction. She persisted in demanding the young man return her money, leading to a warning for stalking. Despite the warning, she continued, risking arrest for harassment. Ken kept the investigation going even after the divorce, receiving regular updates. His tenacity was something to be wary of. Half a year had passed since I started living with Oliver and Luna. Luna had given birth to a baby girl. I help with childcare and household chores. It's a busy life, but I find happiness in my daily routine. Then one day, Ken came to visit. His face, which I hadn't seen in a while, looked healthy and he seemed well. Holding his granddaughter, Ken's face was brimming with smiles. Have you been able to sleep better since the divorce? Thanks to you, I think I'm getting about 8 hours now. Ken replied, showing a brightness in his expression that I had never seen before. I've come with some good news today. What's that, some good news? Luna chimed in, her eyes sparkling.
Well, I bought the land where everyone's old house was.
I was stunned. Really? I negotiated with the landowner to get it for a good price. I used Dad's life insurance money. It turned out he had been hiding it so Helen wouldn't find out. So, the condition for him selling it to me was that you, Mom, would live with us. Let's all live together, Oliver, Luna, and you. I pinched my cheek without thinking. Ouch, it's not a dream, is it? Oliver and Luna were laughing. The thought of the joyous and lively life that awaits us in the future brought a smile to my face as well.